It's that time of the week. Time to blast out some Buckeyes talk with Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts and also Kevin Noon. You can catch him on a Buckeye Grove. How you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Doing great.
So everyone in the live chat, certainly contribute your comments and questions. I will pass them along to Steve and Kevin, and who knows, I may have an opinion myself. Last few weeks, we've been preparing to talk 2020 schedule, but there's just been so much news to talk about. We think we've arrived at a bit of a dead spot to talk 2020 schedule for the Buckeyes. And then we'll have a little fun with best of lists, favorites, and the like. Let's get to this 2020 schedule, which I have yet to pull up, but I know that week 2 is a big one. So we can begin there and get your thoughts, starting with Steve in regards to the 2020 schedule. A trip out to Oregon, the 2014 National Championship game rematch. And, of course, the Buckeyes and the Ducks got together at the 2010 Rose Bowl as well. A couple games go back into the 80s during the Earl Bruce era, in which the Buckeyes beat the Ducks there as well. What I remember, Steve, going into both of those most recent matchups that were obviously on a huge stage, especially in 14, was that Oregon spaces everybody out. They're quick, they're fast, they're too fast, too up-tempo, going to run too many plays for this defense. And that's why both times they were just about a 5-point favorite in both of those games, and we know how they turned out.
Yeah, no question about it. And obviously the last matchup for the national championship was one that Ohio State fans will remember forever, obviously, to win the national championship over Oregon. It was down at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, and they had Marcus Mariota, the Heisman winner. One of my vivid memories of that game was late in the game. He's trying to scramble the team, and Joey Bosa planted him right there, deep in the pocket after he threw the ball away, and he had to come out of the game for a play or two, and Ohio State punched it in for a late touchdown. Ezekiel Elliott scored the last touchdown and came to the sideline, and who was there to greet him but LeBron James was right there on the sideline when he came over, and I was actually standing right there myself and got some pictures of them together and everything else. But yeah, tremendous memories, I think, that in the Rose Bowl. You think about Terrell Pryor played one of the best games he ever played as an Ohio State Buckeye at the end of his junior year when they beat Oregon, and Jeremiah Masoli, I think, was their quarterback that year out at the Rose Bowl. And so Ohio State's never lost to Oregon. Interesting enough to say, I think 8 or 9-0, something like that. And Ohio State actually played the dedication game at the famed Autzen Stadium back in the 60s, when I think they've played on the same site forever. It's just they had renovated it and brought it up to what was then a modern time in the 60s and rechristened it or however. But Ohio State played the dedication game there in the mid-60s and won that game when they had it. So there is a little bit of history between the two schools. The Ducks will be trying to knock off Ohio State. And as I look at my handy-dandy sheet here, they were 12-2 and ended up 5th in the country, won the Rose Bowl, and, of course, defeated Wisconsin. Is a little bit of a controversial finish, I think, there at the Rose Bowl. Maybe a call or two didn't go Wisconsin's way in that game, or I don't know. All the games have kind of run together at this point. But I know they lost their outstanding – yeah, I know they lost their outstanding quarterback, Justin Herbert. He's gone now to the NFL. And I'm looking at their combine invitations, 3 offensive linemen, Jake Hansen, Shane Lemieux, and Calvin Throckmorton, as well as the tight end Jacob Breland, and a wide receiver, Jawan Johnson. So you could say right there, 6 starters off the offense, all going to the combine. So they're going to be trying to reload a little bit on the offensive side of the football, Oregon. But the good news for them is the game's going to be played in Eugene at Autzen Stadium, which has become one of the great home field advantages, I think, in all of college football for them. And be interesting to see when we get out there on September the 12th. I know a lot of people are thinking about going out Thursday and doing a lot of sightseeing in that area. and making a full weekend of it. Uh, the Pac-12 TV partners will have this game, which would I assume is ABC, ESPN, or Fox. One of those three will televise it, and almost certainly it'll be in prime time on the East Coast at 7 p.m. or 7:30, which will be 4 o'clock or 4:30 Pacific time out there. So, and it's a matchup of two teams that I think everybody has in the top 10 or top 15 on their early look at next season. It's just what Mario Cristobal going to do at the quarterback position and reloading all those spots on offense. So it's going to be one of the most anticipated, if not the single most anticipated non-conference game of the season for next year. I know Clemson plays a night game, I believe, against Notre Dame at some point as well. I think NBC already came out with that, and that's going to be a big one as well. Although they're kind of considered a quasi ACC member, even if they're not full, but still a non-conference game. So there's a couple of them that come to mind. Not sure if Alabama's playing a marquee game this year or not, but who is it?
They've got USC.
Oh, yeah. So there you go. And USC has got what I think probably a pretty good team coming back, even though they got thumped in the Holiday Bowl. But by the end of the season, they were a pretty good team, good young quarterbacks. There's some non-conference games to look forward to, but I think this is the biggest of all of them.
Yeah, Kevin, what do you think about this schedule? So we don't want to bypass the Falcons of Bowling Green there in week 1 at the Shoe, of course, on September 5th. But and any Ohio State fans that are watching right now or will watch the replay, keep in mind we had an Oregon live stream last night, so you can get the take from the Oregon folks on the Buckeyes. And let me tell you, great respect from the Oregon media in regards to this Ohio State matchup. And just about everyone in the live chat just didn't give Oregon much of a chance. I thought it was a bit overdone from that standpoint. So Tyler Shook, he is the quarterback that will be most likely replacing Justin Herbert as more of a dual threat guy for Oregon. But Kevin, you guys in the media for the Buckeyes are going to have to travel all the way out there to the Northwest. So for the rest of us, we just kind of kick back on the couch and enjoy the football. But man, you guys have a long ways out there and then all the way back.
Yeah, I'm going to have to start a paper route right now to save up my ducats for that plane ticket. I remember back to when I flew out to Seattle for the Washington game, and I was on the ground for maybe 36 hours due to some unforeseen flight issues and whatnot. So I've told myself when I have to fly coast to coast, I'm gonna maximize the trip, because I don't know how many times I'm going to be out there, but I pulled up on Winsipedia the matchup all time between the Buckeyes and Ducks, and yes, Ohio State's 9-0 against them. Oregon has only hit the 20-point plateau once in the series, and that was in the national championship game, whereas Ohio State's only been held under 20 one time, and that was the first game, a 10-7 win in the Rose Bowl in 1958. But, as for the entire schedule, I mean, let's, look at the non-conference. Home games against Bowling Green and Buffalo. Both of those should be, nice little tune-up matches. I'm unaware of a Khalil Mack lining up for Buffalo this time around. That was really his welcome to college football, welcome to the national scene type of game. But, you just never know in that type of game, going back to the Oregon game, going coast to coast. I mean, fortunately, Ohio State returning a lot of contributors, guys that have been on the road, know how to, who've stayed at hotels, done things like that. You sometimes just dismiss some of these guys who are either from small towns or just situations where they don't go more than 10 miles from their home until they go to college. And then you put them on a plane for several hours and you throw them into this situation. So there's always a lot of concerns with a coach, just even on the mechanics of a road game. And this is going to be a heck of a road game going against the Ducks in, one of the loudest stadiums in the nation at Autzen.
Yeah, I'll throw in there. It's going to be planes, trains, and automobiles just to get there, because from Columbus, you probably got to fly to Denver or to Chicago and catch another flight out of those two cities or another hub to get to Portland, and then it's probably a 2-hour drive from Portland to Eugene. And it's, you figure an hour to Chicago and then 4 or 5 hours to Portland probably from there, and then 2 hours in the car. So if you go, let's say you get up at the crack of dawn on Thursday and try and get out there at, say, 7 o'clock flight out of Columbus, you'll be lucky to get to Eugene, if that's your final destination, by dinner time maybe, or mid-afternoon or late afternoon. It's going to be an all-day commute trying to get to the West Coast for that game. But
you do pick up 3 hours.
Yeah, I guess you do, but still, it can be a long time trying to get out there. Very excited to get out there, seeing a lot of the games there on television. It looks like an electric atmosphere, and considered one of the top stadiums in college football. I'll just throw in a thought on the other two non-conference games, Bowling Green and Buffalo, and this kind of runs antithetical to what Gene Smith talked about at one time for a scheduling philosophy, that you're going to play one Power 5 team that is a perennial top 20 type team, and they've got that with Oregon. Then what, in his vision, what he wanted was a top 40 team after that to play at home. And that could be like a Cincinnati, who they played last year, or, maybe a Central Florida. A few years ago, they played them, that type of team. I know they've been better than that in some years, but that's the kind of ilk that they're looking for, more of a mid-major, just outside the Power 5 type team. And then obviously, to fill out the schedule, a MAC quality team. Well, in this case, you have two MAC teams on here, which Bowling Green, obviously, Scott Leffler, the coach there, they were 3-9 last year, and it's been really a rough 5 or 6 years for Bowling Green. Gone through a couple coaches and some different guys there, and Leffler, former Michigan guy, is now the head coach there. And then Lance Leopold at Buffalo, 8-5. He was like a Division III guy, wasn't he? At Whitewater or somewhere, and had won a ton of games and maybe a few national championships. And they jetted him up to Division I at Buffalo, and he's done pretty well there. And again, 8-5 last year, so maybe they can give Ohio State a game for a half or so. But certainly all focused on conference on Oregon.
Philly Special 95, a Penn State fan, commenting that Ohio State sucks. It's unfortunate that Ohio State and Penn State never play to settle the score there.
Yeah.
But that's the thought process there. So there's a bye week this past season, because of the way the calendar formatted. There were 2 bye weeks for everyone in college football. We're back to 1. That comes at an opportune time from one perspective, because it's before a decent showdown with Iowa. Of course, we know what happened to the Buckeyes in 2017 at Iowa, this one in Columbus. But then again, it doesn't break up a pretty difficult stretch. Not a bunch of huge dynamic teams, but all very quality teams, especially, of course, Penn State, with Iowa at Michigan State, at Penn State, Nebraska, Indiana consecutively. A pretty difficult stretch there in October going into November.
I'll throw in September 26th, Greg Schiano, former Ohio State assistant coach, now the head coach at Rutgers again, second time there, hoping to catch lightning in a bottle the second time around. And he'll be bringing Brendan White, former Ohio State player, moved there, and I presume as a graduate transfer will be eligible this coming year. They were 2-10 last season, and obviously Chris Ash was jammed out of there at midseason. As you said, off week, first week of October, but then it's Murderer's Row in a sense. I mean, as hard as it's going to be within the Big Ten, with the ones that are lined up there: Iowa, road games at Michigan State, and then at Penn State, which is the toughest place to play, I think, right now for Ohio State, other than, perhaps Michigan in the Big Ten. And the games with Penn State in recent years have just been nothing short of amazing. So again, probably looking at something like that. And as you said, Nebraska and Indiana coming to Ohio State at the end of that stretch. In Indiana, if I had to think about night games, certainly at Penn State on October the 24th would stick out. But We kind of talked about this before. Fox gets the first pick of the weekend where it wants the first pick, and they're always going to take the Ohio State-Michigan game. And so, and I haven't looked at anybody else's non-conference to see whether there is a Notre Dame-Michigan, which I know they're not playing this year, Notre Dame-Michigan caliber non-conference game that ABC or ESPN would grab for their number 2 overall selection. I don't know that one exists. So I would think ABC, if they are able to get their hands on it, would go for this game October 24th at Penn State and put it in prime time, because it is the game of the year to me in the Big Ten for 2020. It would seem during the regular season. I don't know who they'd even have a case for. Iowa at home could be a night game as well. Beyond that, we've seen some strange games, but put in prime time, and maybe Nebraska October 31st as well, just on name value. But is this the year Nebraska comes back to respectability after a long sojourn through the desert, not even making bowl trips in recent years? And I don't know. Is Frost going to be the guy there? Those are questions, and a tough assignment for them, having to come to Ohio State after getting blown out at home by the Buckeyes last year.
Yeah, of course, you got 7 teams in each division, so you only play 3 teams in the other divisions. So that's obviously key to all this. I did some analysis a couple of years ago to try to gauge the disparity in the quality of opponent that on the high end and the low end. And at one point, so if you've played 9 Big Ten teams, obviously 9 Big Ten games, then you're playing 3 teams in the other division that have a composite 27 game record in the Big Ten. And I saw as a disparity as much as like somebody that had to face 3 teams that went 21-6, and somebody else faced 3 teams that went 7-20 the year before. Kevin, for the Buckeyes, it's a fairly tough draw. Nebraska, if they live up to it. Iowa, Illinois is a little bit better than they've been, winning 6 games this last year.
Right. You sit there and you look at that crossover. I mean, Iowa certainly is the team that I think that jumps off the page more so than Nebraska, just because we have short memories, and we remember Iowa. I mean, granted, that game was in Iowa City. This game will be in Columbus coming off of the open week. But, they certainly seem to be a team that can rise up and win those games at home. Will they be able to do it in Columbus? I don't know. Nebraska's in Columbus as well. Illinois is going to be in Champaign come, November 21st when they're going to play. That game is windy under the best of circumstances. That's not going to be best of circumstances. That's going to be one of those weird games where weather really could play a factor, even if it's, 0 precipitation. The designers of that stadium must have taken a sabbatical, and they just said, oh, to hell with it. Let's place it east to west, because that thing, the wind whips through there like no other place that I've ever been before. But, it's on face value, it seems to be a little bit more of a better schedule than what they had as their crossover last season, where, they played Northwestern, who they'd played before in the Big Ten championship game. Obviously, they had Nebraska again and Wisconsin. When you just look at wins and losses, this one seems to be a little bit more manageable, especially with 2 of the games being at home. But you just never know, because we didn't see Purdue coming. We didn't see Iowa coming. So, of course, everybody's going to be looking at this schedule, racing around, trying to figure out what that potential trap game is, because, we're predictable and we love to talk about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
This will be my 26th year, and Kevin, like 12 to 14th year, somewhere in that range.
More than that.
Yeah, more. Well, in terms of traveling back and forth and whatever, I think we could write a travel log on all these places. The one redeeming part of the Illinois trip is you get to go to the Beef House there on the Illinois-Indiana border, kind of an old school steakhouse place there. That's probably the one redeeming thing of going to Champaign. I can't think of a whole lot else that comes into mind with that. And as I've said any number of times, a lot of people unhappy that Rutgers and Maryland are part of the Big Ten. I can tell you, after years and years and years of going to West Lafayette and Champaign, Purdue and Illinois, that when they got traded to the other division during that latest East-West reshuffle, and we picked up Washington, D.C. and New York City, believe me, I was not too unhappy with that trade. And yeah, we still got to make these trips every once in a while. So we'll be back in Champaign this year for all of its glory. As he said, a glorified. Think about how windy it's going to be there on November the 21st. And I remember they had a great team in 2006 with Troy Smith, Heisman Trophy winner. Went in there and the wind was whipping, and they won the game like 17-10 against one of the worst Illinois teams on record. And the wind is just a great equalizer a lot of times over there. But I don't know. It has to be blowing pretty good for Illinois to pull off that one.
You stole my thunder with that one, Steve, because that's exactly what came to mind when Kevin was talking about the conditions there, that dominant Ohio State team that ran through the schedule at 12-0. Yeah, that Illinois team was pretty bad at 2 or 3 wins, and that was an ugly, ugly game. And they've had a couple other ones with really good teams. Obviously, Ohio State's had nothing but good teams for 15 years, but some really good teams going into Champaign and playing some ugly games against the Illini during that time. And of course, Illinois' most recent big win, huge win in the Big Ten was against Ohio State, although that was in Columbus, of course, in 2007. And then Michigan's back at the shoe to finish things off. And man, I don't know what Michigan can do before that game to change the narrative. Michigan fans are simply waiting for that game, or maybe they're not waiting for that game and not wanting to see another one. But man, Michigan can really do nothing to change what the expectation is or the narrative on that program until they win that game, and they're back in Columbus.
Yeah, short of kidnapping somebody, I don't know what's going to happen at this point. I mean, it's easy to talk about it in February, and we'll go through it. And I don't have Michigan's schedule in front of me, but I'm sure they will be they'll have the September Heisman and the September National Championship, and they'll be back. And here's all these reasons of why they're going to be able to do it, and then they'll come, crashing back down to earth. And, Ohio State very well could be sitting at the point where they've already punched their ticket to Indianapolis at that point. And, we'll see from there. But, honestly, it's that stretch of the 17th and 24th of October that I'm watching. And that's the first, the way the Ohio State schedule works out. They've got the road trip to Oregon, and then they have two game road trips. And the first one is much more daunting than the second one. The second one being Maryland and Illinois. But the first one is going to East Lansing and then going to State College. East Lansing, we're really not sure who's going to be the head coach there at Michigan State. We're really not sure how intact they're going to be at this point, if you believe the stuff that's going on with Curtis Blackwell and the court cases and whatnot. But, it's still a tough place to play. And then, of course, you're going to have the whiteout at that point. But, getting back to the Michigan game, I just don't know how people, and I don't know. I haven't talked to a lot of Michigan fans. I don't know a lot of Michigan fans. Maybe that's by design. Maybe it's just by happenstance. But, no Shea Patterson. Are they going to, addition by subtraction there? They're going to they can't be in a worse shape in terms of running the ball. Chris Evans comes back after his academic issues that he ran into. I think they're going to be a bit better running the ball. I don't know if the offensive line is going to be a whole lot better. And while Ohio State certainly is not going to have Chase Young this year to torment them, Ohio State's not going to be taking a huge step back there on the defensive line. And I really think that you just look at both lines and how they're going to play, and you're going to get a really good indication of how that game's going to go down.
Yeah, Michigan obviously, losing at home this past year now has to go to Ohio State, where they haven't won since, I think, the year 2000. That'll be a full 20 years if Ohio State can win at home this coming season. So, yeah, it's a little bit of a daunting task for them. 9-4 this past season, going to start over at quarterback, lose Donovan Peoples-Jones early to the NFL as well. And, just going to have to, the good thing that I would say, about the only thing I'd say in their defense is they have recruited reasonably well enough. They've recruited better players than Purdue and Iowa over the last 5 years, and those are programs that were able to jump up and bite Ohio State here within the last 5 years. It's like a lot from a psychological standpoint. I think it was Devin Bush or somebody around Super Bowl time was asked about Ohio State's dominance in the series. Maybe it was somebody else who played there recently, but I think it was him. He just said, we've got to get past this point where we need to count on Ohio State having a bad day for us to beat them. And that was the first kind of stark reality comment that somebody connected with Michigan recently. It's been a year or so since he played there, but that somebody came out and really admitted that there is a chasm. They refuse to admit it by and large, even though it stares them in the face every November. But I don't know, just a thought about that is that, I guess you always throw out the records when that game's played, but Ohio State has just dominated Michigan in recent years and put up huge point totals. What was it, 62 the year before, and then 56 this year. And with Fields and Olave and Wilson and 3 offensive linemen coming back, they're going to average in the 40s again this coming year. So it's going to be incumbent on Michigan and whoever they play to try and stop that Ohio State offense.
Yeah, the Don Brown defense has done great against 90% of their schedule, but just not against Ohio State.
Dr. Blitz.
Yeah, so
I had an in on.
Ohio State certainly has that out schemed at this point, and whenever Michigan makes an adjustment, they've already got the next move there. So advantage Ohio State in terms of just the intangibles from coaching, because they've had a plan and been able to execute at a high level.
Yardvark's Lawn Care is asking, why do we continue to schedule tough non-conference games when it never helps us? I don't know that it never helps.
I disagree. They beat Oklahoma in 2016 on the road, and that's why they made the playoff that year. Despite the loss to an unranked at the time Penn State team, they still got into the playoff. Now I know they got smoked by Clemson, but I think that there are instances. I think Oregon was a team this past year that would be scratching its head. Why did we go down and play Auburn on a neutral field and not get any of the benefit of the doubt from that? They lost the game. Obviously, had they won that game, they get in as the 4th seed instead of Oklahoma, I would presume. So I don't know. It is what it is. But I think that when you are a perennial top 10 team like Ohio State has been, and really perennial top 5 team, it's incumbent on you to kind of carry the banner for college football and for the Big Ten and play the likes of Oregon and Notre Dame and Texas and Oklahoma and all these other teams they have coming up. Next year, it'll be Oregon at home. The following 2 years, it's a home and home with Notre Dame. So, yeah, it will be again, the focus of college football on those particular days is on your program. And if you do well in those games, you're in the playoff hunt. So,
well, I'd have more issue with the fact of the Big Ten playing 9 conference games than about going out and playing out of conference. You're playing against another team that could potentially play you yearly, or at least have you scouted down very well. Know every single thing that you're going to do. Know your personnel, recruiting directly against you on the vast majority of these kids. In light of the fact that we don't have conference to conference parity in terms of scheduling requirements and whatnot, I think the biggest disadvantage for a conference is playing those 9 league games and having that there, as opposed to playing even a top 40 team out of conference or whatever. We see these eight conference game leagues where they play a 1AA and a couple of jabrones and then maybe a good team or whatnot, or a regional rival from out of conference or whatnot. But I think the greatest inequality in terms of scheduling is by playing 9. Everybody needs to get to 8, or everybody needs to get to 9. They need to have something that just equates things better. We're never going to get to the point where we're going to bring the bottom and even the middle up of the ACC. Clemson may win the ACC for the next 15 years. The rest of that conference is trash. So we need to at least get the out-of-conference scheduling on par.
And people should understand, I'll just say this real quick, Steve. People should understand that if you survey Power 5 non-conference schedules, aside from some ridiculous situations like a Baylor who never plays anyone out of conference, but there's only a handful of schools like that. Look at Stanford's non-conference schedule last year. They played Notre Dame, Central Florida, and a Northwestern team coming off the Big Ten championship game appearance. Most teams are playing multiple tough teams, if not certainly playing one difficult opponent, if not two. USC's got Alabama and Notre Dame this year, so you gotta pick up somebody. Even the mid-level teams and the low-end teams in the Power Five are playing somebody out of conference. I think the non-conference schedules are tougher now than I remember in recent memory.
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents on that is I hope the committee is savvy enough to look at a team's 12 or 13 game body of work and understand that it's not apples to oranges. And Kevin is definitely right when he says that a conference game against even Purdue, which would be on par with, Vanderbilt or whoever, that an SEC team in the West
More like
didn't
maybe
play.
a Mississippi school. I would Vanderbilt's.
Yeah,
no.
absolutely.
Well, I'm just trying to say, okay, one of the in recent vintage, Ole Miss or Mississippi State, that a team in the East didn't play as their 9th conference game. That's still because they're scouting them so well, so familiar with the personnel, have played them on a routinely regular basis, whether it was last year or the year before, that there is familiarity, and it is a much more, you're right, it is a much more dangerous game to play, the 9th conference game. And those were both crossover games, Purdue and Iowa. And I debate this with people on our board all the time. Well, that was the 9th game. I'm like, how do you know that was the 9th game? The Nebraska game could have been the 9th game.
The 7th game or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, you don't know which one was the 9th game. But my point, coming all the way back around the bend, is I want Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State, and this past year LSU or whoever it may be, to be judged on a 13-game strength of schedule and that type of thing. And, you look at some of those teams, like Clemson did jump out and play Texas A&M, and they did jump out and they played South Carolina. Now, granted, South Carolina not very good, but a rivalry game and a team they play every year, akin to an Iowa or Purdue. That's their 9th conference game, even though it's not a conference game. So, but their conference coming all the way back around the bend is so terrible that, Wake Forest, Duke, et cetera, don't equate to Indiana and whoever else you want to put up against from Michigan State from the Big Ten. So apples to oranges the whole way around. But I don't like it when Reese Davis, and to their credit, I never heard him hold this against Ohio State all year, where they said, well, they only played Cincinnati out of conference. I was waiting for it, but I never heard it. And, Reese Davis is famous for those, just take one apple off of a huge apple tree and then compare it to the oranges. I mean, that's what they love to do there at the worldwide leader. So at any rate, to their credit, they didn't hold this year's non-conference against Ohio State. But then again, when you're 13-0, they can't downrate you. So there you go.
Well, to Kevin's point, the typical SEC Western Division schedule is this. Auburn's a perfect example. I'm not looking at their schedule, but I've got a pretty good handle on it. They scheduled Oregon last year. They had Washington the year before. They have one difficult game out of 4. The other 3 are extremely light. It's always the Citadel, East Tennessee, a New Mexico State, a MAC team, etc. Those are the other 3 games. Now, the SEC Eastern Division, what makes that different, and Steve, you touched upon it, is South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky all have ACC rivalry games. Kentucky, Louisville, Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina. So they already have a potentially difficult game. Obviously, it depends on the cycle of that particular program. And to their credit, most of those teams, most of the time, schedule another game. For example, the last 2 years, Georgia scheduled Notre Dame in addition to having Georgia Tech. Florida has scheduled Michigan a couple of years ago in addition to the Florida State game. So sometimes they have 2 difficult games. South Carolina, of course, takes on Clemson. They had actually North Carolina and App State. So they had a pretty difficult non-conference schedule.
Yeah, I think
I'd just like to see some of these teams travel a little bit more. I remember when LSU played against Wisconsin at Lambeau or whatnot. I'm waiting for Alabama to go somewhere to play a non-conference game that's not either Dallas, Atlanta, Birmingham. They
pretty
just
much it.
don't travel. I mean, and that's great. I mean, if you can get away with it, it's fantastic. But it's not equal.
That's exactly the point that Stephen Rowland's making in the comment, and it's valid. Alabama has played one difficult, well, for the last 2 years, it's not been a difficult game because it was Duke and Louisville. But before that, USC, Wisconsin, on down the line, I could go through them. They've played a difficult non-conference game. But to Kevin points, it's never on the road. It's been in Dallas or Atlanta, all of them, going back to them going to Penn State, I believe, in 2010 or 11. Now, Alabama has scheduled Texas home and home and Notre Dame coming up home and home. So in like 5 years from now, they're finally going to get on the road for the first time in like 15 years. And I think I threw this out, Steve, before you jump in here. Florida has not ventured outside of the state of Florida for a non-conference game since 1991.
Yeah, that's crazy. They played Miami a few times, and then they have their buy-in games there at Florida Field, certainly. And there was talk about them in Central Florida doing, if they could have done a 3 at Florida and 2 at Central Florida, I don't know why they wouldn't have all agreed to that, because it gives you scheduling certainty in a time when it's tough to get games. But at any rate, whatever. We love to talk about this, and I think Ohio State approaches the scheduling in the manner, as I brought out earlier with Gene Smith, that they want to be challenged. They want to show recruits that, yeah, we're going to play the best in the country. And, we played Notre Dame. We're going to play them again. And we're going to play Oklahoma and Texas and all these other teams. For Alabama, and this is kind of a thought, a chat I did last night, somebody asked me, like, how have things changed in the last 20 years in terms of recruiting? And I went back and looked at some top 10 recruiting classes from like 2002, 2006, and you see names in there like Florida State and USC and Miami, Florida, and different schools like that. And it was pointed out that this year, I think 6 or 7 of the top 10 classes were from the SEC.
6 of 8.
And it's a crazy phenomenon. Obviously, most of the talent is concentrated in Florida, Georgia, then Texas, California, and then, lesser places after that. Some other places have emerged. Some other places have gone down. Ohio, Pennsylvania have traditionally been great places. But, Clemson is a team that has vaulted into that top 10 on an annual basis from the ACC and kind of replaced Florida State as much as anything. And Miami used to get, great players just from Broward and Dade County down there. I mean, it was just automatic. And now, Auburn and Alabama and Clemson and other places go in there and take whoever they want out of there and, leave Miami kind of, suffering for the fumes down there at times. But I guess it has been cyclical. USC there, you think about the great teams Pete Carroll had, and when those teams, when was that dynasty? It was basically from about 2000 to about 2009, a decade ago, and going back, 15 to 20 years ago, they really haven't done much on the national scene in the last decade, a little over a decade, and it's so cyclical. And you just wonder, Alabama not making the playoff, not even making a New Year's Six bowl this year. Is this the beginning of the end of their dynasty? I don't know. It sounds like Saban is still going to be there for another 4 or 5 years, probably. But that is a little bit of a crack in the foundation to have the kind of year that they had, way below their standards. And we saw that with USC. Some things kind of cracked in there and kind of stopped that dynasty from being as good as it could possibly be. And to have SEC schools recruiting at the level that they're now recruiting, all of them, or 6 of them in the top 8, as you said, that just puts more pressure on Alabama to maintain that top spot. And I'm curious this year if they can get back on top in that league.
I don't know.
Tua's injuries were really what drove him there, in my opinion. It's not anything that's done with lack of talent, or anything there. I mean, it was just the disparity between Tua and Mac Jones. I think that if Tua was healthy, Alabama, at worst would have been the 4 seed, and would have gone from there. So I mean, I have to disagree a little bit there in saying that I think that all of this talk of Alabama's demise is greatly greatly premature. There will be a point where they will, come to the end of the line, but I don't think that they're there right now. You look at the recruiting, you look at what they've got. I just think that if it was one of those injuries that they didn't have Cardale Jones waiting in the wings.
Yeah, the Alabama demise, exactly. I would love to say that I'm on board with that, but at the same time, they lost to LSU 46-41. We know what LSU did to everyone else. And then they lost to Auburn without Tua, with Mac Jones. And he threw 2 pick sixes in that game. So they lost 48-45. He throws 2 pick sixes. They miss a field goal from 30 yards that would have tied the game and sent it into overtime. And then we saw what they did to Michigan, beating them by 3 scores with a backup quarterback. So I think at 11-2, I made the comment to a number of people that call all the time when they said, who should be the 4th playoff team? I kept saying, well, who earned it? Well, let's see Oklahoma, Oregon, Utah, et cetera, play out. Who's the 4th best team? I would put Alabama ahead of all those teams, put them right there in the playoff. So, Steve, to your point, nothing lasts forever. We'll see a demise from Clemson, Alabama at some point. I don't know when that's coming.
Yeah, it could be a while. Hey, do we want to talk Michigan State? Some thoughts?
Yeah, I
about
think
that?
We'll put off the schedule talk again another week. We already talked about the schedule. What am I talking about? I'm talking about our fun questions. We'll leave Tony around for those. Let's talk about this Michigan State situation. So I'll just set it up this way. I was on here live, got the news about Mark Dantonio. We can talk about his tenure and what he accomplished at Michigan State. But the first name out of my mouth, I knew I was going to get pressed from somebody to come up with coaching names, was Luke Fickell. Now, he apparently has turned down the job and other people are in play. I'm looking at a list right now, and the most interesting name from a national perspective and a Big Ten angle is Brett Bielema, who's currently the outside linebackers coach at New York with the NFL Giants. But you guys can chime in on Dantonio's tenure and, of course, what's ahead for Michigan State.
I mean, really bad timing. I mean, it really seems like Mark Dantonio, I don't want to put words in his mouth or anything, but by waiting until the point that he did, thought that he might be able to get his lieutenant, Mike Tressel, that job at least for a 1-year interim basis. Board of Trustees had a different opinion there. They went all the way to the altar with Luke Fickell. Luke Fickell, really not a guy that, I mean, he left Ohio State kicking and screaming. He develops roots somewhere, and he really doesn't want to move on. I was not surprised to see him turn that job down, even with everybody saying, oh, it's going to happen, a framework of a contract's out there. Ultimately, when he talked to his wife, they decided that it was best to stay at Cincinnati at this point. Brett Bielema's a name that's being mentioned. Jim McElwain's a name that's being mentioned at this point. But, I think a lot of coaches are watching that situation carefully. You're putting yourself in a very difficult bind at that spot. It's a conference with Michigan. It's a conference with Penn State. It's a conference with Ohio State. You're going to have a lot of challenges there. I mean, they're 11-1 and 10-2 and 12-0 seasons aren't going to grow on trees there. I don't necessarily think that they have a very stacked roster at this point. I think they've got a lot of holes to fill at this point. I think Mark Dantonio's recruiting started to suffer a little bit at the end. Oh, and the whole situation with Curtis Blackwell and what's going on with those issues. Does the NC2A get involved if they find any validity in Blackwell's beliefs and claims of saying that he was off campus recruiting as a non-position coach at that point, and some other things, finding jobs for parents and whatnot? It's kind of a difficult situation, and I don't know if you're going to find a wow coach that's going to just jump into that position who's currently in the game.
Yeah, good points all the way around. And Dantonio, he's the best coach they've had in my lifetime. I mean, they had Saban, but he didn't lead them to anywhere near the type of success that Dantonio did. But I think losing to Alabama in that playoff in the manner that they did kind of sent him into maybe a little bit of a tailspin, and that he thought he needed to cut some corners and recruit like Ohio State and Alabama and Clemson do. And they accepted some guys who I think you could charitably say were at-risk guys, and definitely turned out to be at-risk guys, both off the field and never delivering the promise that they thought they would on the field either. And then you have that's what happens when you go 4-8 or whatever it was the one year, and then 7-6 the last 2 years. And I think that this was the time for him to leave. Maybe would have been better had it happened in December, although in his contract he had this thing in there that if he stayed through the middle of January, he was entitled to a $4 million retention bonus. And perhaps that should have been negotiated for the good of all parties that he left, and they were able to preserve recruiting and get Luke Fickell or get somebody when there was momentum with the program. And I think only the future will tell whether they're going to face a postseason ban or an NCAA probation at some point. But I think the fact of the matter is he's left this program in a position where they don't have good enough players to where even if you did get an NCAA postseason ban, it's not like you're going to be missing out on the Rose Bowl or a New Year's Six game or a playoff game. You're going to be missing out on the Gator Bowl or the Holiday Bowl or something along those lines. The Quicko Change-O Bowl in Detroit or whatever that is. And so I think they have got to get some linear thinking with the president, the trustees, the athletic director, and decide what they want. What do we want? This is what we're looking for. Somebody who will represent our morals, our understanding, our principles, and how we want to go forward. Because I think that's what they're going to be remembered for and judged for when this decision is debated in years to come. And the football program is a front door to the university. And Michigan State has had one awful situation after another with Larry Nassar. Obviously, the situation that Dantonio, and the school was sued by Blackwell, the allegations, against some of Dantonio's players, the allegations against some of Tom Izzo's players on the basketball side, all of that stuff, it's not going to go away. And they need to confront all those issues head on, certainly, and deal with them properly. And above board, that's the biggest thing at this point, is transparency and dealing with things the best way that you can. And know that you can never make full amends for something that happened years ago, but you can do the best that you can in this moment to make it better. And to get somebody, it's like they almost need a Jim Tressel or somebody like that who will walk in there, be an efficient program manager, put his head down, get you the best players he can get, surround himself with the best coaches he can get, and build it one day at a time. There's no quick fix. And again, Dantonio won big with a lot of guys from Ohio who were not Ohio State players. And he beat Ohio State with some Ohio guys who were not Ohio State caliber players. And so, again, get whatever you can get from the state of Michigan, and then concentric circles out from there. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, Chicago, and branch out and get the best players you can get in there. And Michigan State, there's no reason why you can't win at Michigan State and be a perennial 9-10 win a year type program, but they are a long way from that right now. And this hire is going to determine quite a bit. As you said, Brett Bielema, possibility. He's at least a guy that can go in there and say, I've won three Big Ten championships. I've coached in Rose Bowl. I've done this. I've done that. Let me show you the way and do it this way. We were talking at basketball interviews today. He led Arkansas to 3 bowl games. People think about how he was terrible at Arkansas. He at least had 3 teams that were 6-6 that got to bowl games, even though they routinely got drubbed by Alabama and the rest of them in that SEC West. But if it's him, so be it. If it's Mike Tressel, he comes with good bloodlines. His dad was a coach. His uncle was a coach, obviously, at national championships. And so I don't know where it's going to go. But I think, they need to turn a corner at Michigan State and decide what they want to be going forward, because there's been a disturbing lack of leadership there really over the last 6 or 7 years.
It's not about a bowl ban that they should be concerned about.
No, absolutely not.
Reductions. If you don't have the horses and then you take away from the 85, then they're in bigger trouble at that point. And I mean, we watched teams that could not get a first down. I mean, getting a first down was a small victory for him at this point. And so much, and I read about it in the super chat, and I agree 100%. It was his loyalty to his staff. It was the offensive staff that he had that instead of letting anybody go, he rearranged the deck chairs in the Titanic. He put everybody in different positions. Well, this has got to work. Well, guess what? It didn't work. So, a lot of this was self-inflicted on his point and his stubbornness. And loyalty, if you're an MSU fan, stubbornness, if you're anybody else, I think really kind of led to some of these issues that whoever the next coach is going to have to face at this point. And I really think they need to go out of house. I don't know Mike Tressel personally. Obviously, I know his uncle and I know his dad, but I think that they need to go out of house and find somebody and kind of sweep up some things and move forward at this point, or they're going to be back in this position next year or in 3 years or 4 years, and this becomes a decade-long position. But one other thing, too, about Michigan State in particular, their administration is a clown show. It is an absolute clown show. They hate their AD. The fans hate their AD. The board of trustees is off, speaking out of turn. They got to fix a lot of other things. There are some major issues going on, Larry Nassar notwithstanding, that they've got to address before they really sit there and think that anybody's going to drag themselves on hand and knees to East Lansing to take this job.
Yeah, the guy from Detroit, Mike Valenti, was on a downhill roll yesterday on the sports channel in Detroit, and he's a Michigan State guy, and he said, I can remember listening to him in the fall when things were going bad. He goes, Mark Dantonio, we'll name the facility after you. We'll name the field after you. We'll build a statue for you, just like Magic Johnson has over at the Breslin Center. If you just agree to leave, that would be wonderful. And then yesterday, his comment was after they dropped the ball entirely on Luke Fickell, he said, what I would like to see done is if we could put the athletic director and the board of trustees in a hot air balloon and then sail that balloon directly into the sun. He just said that would be a great remedy for this situation. That goes back to what I'm saying is you got to have this linear thinking, get everybody in a room, board of trustees executive session with the athletic director and the president, and say these are the principles and the outline for what we as a 9, 10, 15 person group are looking for. Linear thinking, and go get that person to lead this thing into the future, because it is the front door of your university in many regards. That, and obviously their basketball program is as well, with Tom Izzo been there 2 decades as well, or 25 years, I guess now. So to me, athletics is important in the whole framework there, and they are running a real risk right now of falling way off the pace in this Eastern Division.
I think what Dantonio accomplished over the first half of his tenure there is going to stand as one of the great coaching jobs in the last
I agree
25 years in college football. And this is one of the reasons why I left this comment up by Dennis Wilson. So here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, we are the sworn enemy of illogic and statements of, quote, fact that are incorrect. So look up George Perlis's record at Michigan State versus Mark Dantonio, and you could basically take the two names, Dennis, you could flip them. Dantonio had way more success than George Perlis. It's not even close.
I think
I'm not going to go through it. Believe me, look it up.
68,
Dennis was
7-4 overall for Perlis, 53-42-2 in league play. He won the conference twice. I mean, Mark Dantonio made that Michigan State job a lot better than what it was before. He, you know, he left it probably in some pretty bad, dire straits right now at this point, but he certainly made, you know, Michigan State into a much more attractive destination overall, just based on what he was able to do. George Perlis, 87, they won the Rose Bowl. 90, they were tied for first, but they still ended up going and winning the John Hancock Bowl, which I couldn't tell you what that's morphed into at this point. And then outside of that, I mean, you know, some seconds, thirds, sevenths.
What is the John Hancock Bowl now? Is that
it's the Sun Bowl?
Yeah,
that was in El Paso. Yeah. So basically, what you're going to look at with Michigan State, from the time I started watching college football in the mid to late 70s, I guarantee if you look at their cumulative record at Michigan State, it's about 55% winning percentage. Tons of 6-5, 7-4, 5-6 when we were playing 11-game seasons. And yes, as Kevin notes, 2 decent seasons from Perlis, a really good Rose Bowl win against USC in 87. They tied for the Big Ten title in 90. And then they had a big year in 99 when they beat Florida and finished in the top 10. Other than those 3 seasons over the span of 40 years, 5, 6, 7 and wins seasons, very minor bowl appearances. And then Dantonio takes over. They tie for the Big Ten title, only lose 1 game in 2010. They win a Cotton Bowl. They get to a college football playoff. They win a Rose Bowl. They finish in the top 5 in the nation 3 times. They finish in the top 10 4 times. He finished ranked 6 times in like 7 seasons.
Yeah.
It's not even close to what
it's not even a discussion. And he humbled Michigan in the process. You know, I mean, that was the thing, is that they took over that rivalry with Michigan. And I don't know what the exact numbers were at one point, but probably won 6 out of 8 in an 8-year stretch, something like that, against the University of Michigan. And you know, for the people that live in Michigan, that's as big a deal as all that other stuff. Is that when green can beat you know, maize and blue, that's what they hang their hat on for an entire year, just like Ohio State and Michigan. So yeah, I think you know, again, he in some respects was a victim of his own success. And I think the loss to Alabama caused them to stray from their principles and their guiding provisos and ideas of these are the people we want to be associated with in our program. And I think that they tried to cut some corners and ultimately led to their demise.
Yeah, not a lot of 11-2, 11-3, 13-1, 11-2, 12-2, 10-3 on George Perlis's resume.
No,
that's what I'm staring at. All right, yeah, should be interesting what they are able to determine there. I think it's a difficult place to win going forward because of the competition in the division. The recruiting level in the state is not high, and because of the infractions that are staring them right in the face, I think it's going to be difficult. Penn State obviously recovered very well from their situation, but this is not Penn State.
Yeah, and Indiana and Maryland are coming on.
Yeah.
You know, Rutgers, you know, remains to be seen what Schiano is going to do out there. But Big Ten East should get a little tougher top to bottom, I think, with the ones at the bottom making some strides and making some moves. If Loxley can be this great recruiter that everybody reputed him to be at Maryland, then maybe they have some talent to win some games. They certainly weren't any good this past year, but you know, I'm interested to see where it goes. And again, we're going into a new frontier. I mean, and there's a lot of people surrounding the sport, going back to Fickle, one last thing, who believe that it could go to an 18 playoff at some point. And at that point, maybe a group of 5, the top group of 5 champion. And I've never just said put them in, because if they're ranked 23rd, I don't want them in the final 8. But if they are meeting a threshold of, say, top 12 or 13 or whatever, then I can stretch and give them a spot. But I'm not going to put a 9-3 Central Florida that's the best, you know, group of 5 champion in there. Long story short, Cincinnati, though I don't know that he'll still be there when this thing gets expanded in 3 or 4 years, could be a prime spot for that position. But I don't know. That's some long-term thinking, and to think much more beyond the upcoming season is interesting, because, you know, if Penn State becomes open, if Notre Dame would become open, those are places I would leave Cincinnati to go be the coach, believe me. So if Michigan would become open, now that's strange to say for an Ohio State guy, but I don't know, that'd be a stretch. I don't know. That's that one. I mean, him being Ohio State, dyed in the wool Columbus, that seems unlikely. But I don't know, just some food for thought down the line, that if a top 15 job came open, top 10 job, that would be what gets him out of Cincinnati.
I was asked that the other day, the Fickle to Michigan fit, and I wrestled with that one as well. Folks, I hope you appreciate what we get here each and every week. So these two guys are slammed with work, covering football and basketball, recruiting, everything that comes with it, all season long, all calendar year long, and they give us an hour plus here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So again, Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove on Rivals. Please join him right there. We got Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts 247 Sports, who's been kind enough to post these videos on Bucknuts as well. So again, these guys are a wealth of information and knowledge and insight into the Big Ten, Ohio State, and the nation. So we appreciate it. Guys, thanks so much for stopping by. We will figure out when we can get together next week.
Sounds great.
All right. Take care.